Hey everybody, it's Carter. Welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between authors. I'm I'm hiding from my pets right now. I in my office I actually have I have kind of movable soundproofing. So my damn dog is barking and my cat's yelling, and I'm locking both of them both up so I can actually conduct one of these interviews. And then I put up the soundproofing, and now I kind of just I don't want to leave my office. It's so nice in here and it's quiet. But eventually I'm going to need to eat something. And then all chaos is going to break out again. But anyway, I just had a lovely conversation, with my guest, who is Rebecca Kelley. So Rebecca is an author, from Portland, Oregon, and, her first novel, Broken Homes and Gardens, was published in 2015, and she also co-authored the Eco-nomical Baby Guide with Joy Hatch. But most recently, she just published her new book, No One Knows Us Here, which is definitely kind of more of a darker, edgier novel than perhaps what she had before. And her journey has been interesting to hear about, and it's not too dissimilar than a lot of writers' journeys where you have an idea and you think your novel's going to be amazing, and then it never sells. And, you start to get the reality of the industry and how that reality does not at all fit, the expectations of writers when they're first starting out. But her journey has led her to getting published with Lake Union, and we go in kind of a discussion about that. Lake Union is an imprint of Amazon, and that's a whole different world when you're published by Amazon, because Amazon can just put you on the homepage of Amazon, and so what's interesting is if you go to Amazon and you look at her first book, which was with a small publisher, Broken Homes and Gardens, 49 reviews, pretty typical. You get to her No One Knows Us Here, which just came out January 1st of this year. As of this recording, there's about 4,500 reviews, and that's, the upside of publishing with Amazon is you get all those eyes on your book cover and you get a lot of sales that way. So it was interesting talking to her about going through that experience and going through the agent experience as well. So I think you're going to like this one. I know I had a good time talking to her. Enjoy. This is my conversation with Rebecca Kelley.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine.
You look a little bit tentative.
I couldn't hear you at first, but I realized I had the volume turned all the way down.
Oh, that would do it. You're in California, right? Or on Pacific?
I'm in Portland.
Portland. Okay. Were you did you grow up there?
No, I've been here since the 90s.
Okay. Yeah,
I grew up in Carson City, Nevada.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm a transplant from California, but I've been here in Colorado for 26 years. So about the same.
Wow.
That's kind of native for Colorado, because everybody moves to Colorado. So I feel like I've been here. The town where I live in, like when I built the house here, they hadn't even paved the roads yet for the downtown. So it's come a long way. So Carson City, Nevada, what was that like? Why were your parents there? Like, what was that reasoning?
Well, my dad grew up in Carson City also, and actually both my mom and dad met in Colorado.
Oh, whereabouts?
They went to college in Boulder.
Oh, that's
And that's where they met.
That's where I am.
My mom grew up in Denver.
Okay. Yeah, my son just got into UC Boulder like 3 days ago. So I don't know if he'll go there or not, but that was nice to see. And then at some point they just moved out to Carson City. And what were they doing?
Yeah, when I was born, my dad was in the military, and I was born in South Carolina. And at some point they made their way back to Carson because that's where my dad's family was.
Okay.
And so by the time I was in kindergarten, that's where we lived. So I grew up there. It's like right on the foothills of the Sierras, and it's really close to Tahoe, about 12 miles. So
a small town. I'm trying to, I totally know Tahoe, but I'm trying to picture like what growing, like childhood in Carson City, Nevada was like.
Well, it's a medium-sized town. I don't know, around 50,000 people.
Oh,
maybe.
okay.
And it's right by Reno.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say medium size. Like it doesn't really have a bus system or anything, and things are kind of spread out.
Yeah. Yeah. And then were you wanting to get out of there? Like by the time you were in high school, or did you stay there for a little while longer?
No, I went to college in Oregon. Okay. So I went to Southern Oregon University, or University of Southern Oregon. At the time, it was called something else. And and then I kind of stayed in Oregon.
Not a bad place to stay at all.
Yeah.
And as you're growing up, did you have siblings?
Yeah, I have one sister.
Okay.
Who's younger.
And I'm always curious to know, kind of with writers, where was that spark? And sometimes there wasn't a spark. Sometimes it was just a slow ember that eventually turned into something. But were you recognizing in yourself, a modicum of creativity, maybe relative to your sister, or, did you have a sense of wanting to be a storyteller at any point?
Yeah, I think from an early age, I kind of knew I wanted to be a writer. I think I was encouraged pretty early on. I was always a really huge reader, and so was my sister. Mm-hmm. My sister was also pretty creative. She's a photographer now. Mm-hmm. But I would write all the time. In 6th grade, my teacher did one of those things where after lunch, she would put a prompt on the board, and then everyone had to write in their journal for 5 minutes on the prompt. Okay. And then she would read what we wrote and write little notes. And she was always very encouraging. I mean, I'm sure she was encouraging to every child, but then I took it personally. I was like, oh, I think you're good at this.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm a little bit the same way. I recognized, it was decades before I decided to write, but I recognized that, I can come up with a rhyme really quickly, or something like that. And it just felt normal to me. But then I'd see other kids like almost be like really impressed. I'm like, well, can't everybody do this? It seems like maybe you had a little bit of a sense of that. Did you keep in touch with that teacher? Does she know that you're a published author now?
No, actually, I don't know what happened to her. I should look her up.
Yeah, you should. I have a high school English teacher who we're friends on Facebook. So I think, and I had no interest in writing in high school. So I think he's surprised and kind of delighted that I turned out to be an author. And then what did you end up studying in college?
Well, I was an English major.
Well, okay.
So I don't know. It was like the only thing I felt like I was good at or interested in. And I majored in English. Like I wasn't thinking about a career at all. Right. Like that's just not how I made decisions back then.
Well, nobody does at that age, right? Yeah. It's you're following what your interests are. Well, I think actually today there is more of that. But I think back then it's just like, no, what interests you? And then you graduate, you're like, no, what the hell do I do?
Right. Also, people kept saying, well, an English major, that's a really good degree. You could just do all sorts of important jobs with that degree. And I was like, oh, okay. It didn't exactly turn out to be true.
I feel like English major almost necessitates some kind of graduate level work. I mean, I don't know. That's my assumption, that you build upon that, and then you narrow your focus, and the English background perhaps, augments, whatever else you go on to study. Did you go on to graduate work, or you graduated with an English major and then what?
Yeah, actually I did. Well, I went off and I taught English for a few years. I went to the Czech Republic.
Oh.
And then I went to Vienna, Austria. So I was there in Europe for about 3 years, of teaching English. But, I had no training in teaching. I just winged it.
But yeah, you knew more than they did because you spoke English.
Yeah. Well, that's what they wanted as a conversational teacher. There actually were properly trained teachers who were teaching them, I don't know, other
Yeah.
kinds of lessons.
Yeah.
And then after that, I did go to graduate school just at Portland State. That's when I moved to Portland. So I came to Portland and I went to graduate school and I studied writing. And then after that, I taught writing for many years at Oregon College of Art and Crafts, which unfortunately no longer exists, went out of business.
Yeah. But, and just to kind of skip back a little bit, that deciding to go, in fact, I was just in Prague and Vienna back in October, and lovely, amazing places. That's a bold move, right? I'm just going to move to Europe for 3 years and teach English. Was that kind of in your nature to do something like that? Or did that experience kind of inform how you approach your own kind of creativity and your own kind of writing?
I just had a lot of wanderlust, even from a young age. Like once in junior high, I was in band and there was some sort of, I don't know, band trip that was going to be in Paris that I somehow stumbled across, and I was like, we've got to do it. And it never happened, but I was just like, oh my gosh, that would be so cool. The whole band went to Paris. And so it was just a dream of mine to go to Europe and learn another language. But then I ended up joining a program, which is how I ended up in the Czech Republic. I was like in a really small little town. And that
what year was this?
This was like 90, 97.
Okay. So, I mean, 5 years removed from kind of the Iron Curtain falling. So it was still pretty unwesternized, I would assume.
Yeah, it was really different back then, different from Western Europe and different, of course, from the United States.
Sure.
And especially in the small town where I was.
Yeah. Wow. And was that your first time traveling abroad? You just moved there?
Well, I had a little taste of it in college. I did a semester in England, but in England,
that's like getting your feet wet a little bit.
Yeah. And I didn't get to learn another language. Yeah. It was really hard to learn Czech, though, especially when I didn't really have any friends and I was all by myself. So you don't really get practice speaking.
Yeah. I mean, in a language that's like 90% consonants, it's definitely challenging. You go, I mean, I don't know if you've been back, but you go to, and obviously Prague is a much larger city than where you went, but you go back now and it's like, you can just speak English anyway. I mean, it's kind of sad. I mean, it's a beautiful city, but it's so catering to tourists now that it's very easy for a Westerner to travel there. But, fortunately it still has its medieval charm for sure. So, you're doing all these jobs that are around writing. Were you writing your own stories at this time, or had you been thinking, did you have aspirations to do that?
Yeah. Well, when I was in the Czech Republic, I was like, I really want to write a book. And I thought I had it in me. I mean, the idea I had wasn't that great. I mean, I don't even know if it was an idea. I was just like, I'm going to write a book about a girl who's basically my age and does stuff similar. Does things that are like things that I do. And I didn't have a computer or anything to write it down. Oh, but when I was in the Czech Republic, I wrote some articles for a magazine there that was for English language learners. So I got kind of published. That was maybe my first publication.
Well, that's exciting. Did that feel exciting at the time?
Yeah, because it was really hard to get published. Remember, back then you had to do everything by mail.
Right, totally.
And so you would write letters to places with, I mean, I guess they'd be called pitches now. I don't think I thought of them as pitches, but you're like, I have an idea for a series of articles, or I actually don't really remember how it happened. Maybe some of it was email, actually. But somehow they agreed that I would write these articles. And they did get published in these little magazines that went out to school children there.
Oh, okay. And with, I mean, at any level of being published is for the first time is kind of thrilling. You're like, oh, somebody who I'm not paying wants my work, and they're going to get it out there. So, there's a little bit of a addiction to that high, right? Of just like, oh, I'm being validated, because speaking for myself at least, and from the people I've talked to, writers tend to be very, very insecure lot. So any kind of validation is kind of like heroin because we're just not expecting it at all, because there's so much rejection usually.
It's just so hard to get your words out there. Unlike today, where like even if no one wanted to publish you could publish yourself, on Twitter, or you could have a blog.
Right. Or you could self-publish a book. Yeah.
Right.
But, I kind of started when my writing journey came out of the blue, and I just wrote this book without knowing anything about writing or what I was doing. But I remember very early on deciding I don't want to self-publish this. I want some kind of external validation, and even getting an agent, or even especially getting an agent is like a huge, like that was like almost my only goal was to get an agent. I don't care if I get published. So when did you start down the path of, crafting your first book? Because I know, No One Knows Us Here is not your first book. I think it's your third. Is that correct?
It's my third published book.
Oh, okay.
Because, like when I was young and in the Czech Republic, and then eventually I went to Vienna, and I ended up staying in an apartment with some roommates, and the room that I rented happened to have a computer in it. And so it was just, I was like, and then I just sat at that computer and I wrote my book. I was really into it. I just wrote and wrote. And I mean, that book never got published.
This is the book about the girl who's about your age doing stuff.
Yeah, doing stuff similar to what I was doing.
Yeah.
Book that was like about nothing, I guess.
Yeah. Well, a lot of books are like that, but did you, I always think that's an interesting experience. That first time you write, how organic is it? And whether or not the plot's any good, was it difficult to write? Like just actually like crafting sentences? And it seems like you had a decent enough background, but you finished an entire novel, it sounds like.
Yeah. I'm always actually wishing I could get back to how it was back then, because I was really into writing it, and I felt like the words just flowed out of me. I even remember once I had some friends over and we were like watching a movie or something, and I was like, I can't wait until they leave so I can get back to my manuscript. I need to get back to my writing. And that's a feeling I almost never get now. Like where I just like, I can't wait to write.
Yeah, it's a struggle, right? But I think there's the progression, because I think that first book is almost easier to write because you're so inexperienced at it that you're just kind of letting it flow out of you. And I think maybe eventually you can get back to that point. I'm not back to that point. Every book I do now takes longer and longer because I think I'm being more thoughtful about it, or considerate about it. But yeah, there is something exciting about just like, I'm doing it. It's coming out of me. And
also, I was just so naive. Like I also had these delusions of grandeur. Like, this is like an amazing book. I think this
right.
book is going to be a huge hit. I mean,
right.
I'm probably the next like J.D. Salinger. This
right.
is like a really important thing I'm writing.
Right. This is going to be taught in schools for decades.
I know. And I was like, if they sold 1 million copies, and even if I only made $1 per copy,
that's $1 million.
I would have $1 million. Like that's like these thoughts are going through my head.
Yeah, it's
hard to get back to that.
Oh yeah, because you get into the reality of publishing. Now, after you finished that first book, did you actively try to seek representation, try to get it sold, or what kind of death did that book die?
Well, I got the writer's market. Do you remember you used to have to buy the book? That's like a catalog of all the agents.
Yeah, stuff. Right.
And and I found, I don't know, 4 agents in it that I thought would be perfect. I don't remember how I chose them. And I mailed, again, it's snail mail out whatever it was you're supposed to mail out, probably a
Query letter. Yeah.
maybe a little sample or something. And I got rejected by all of them. And then I just like gave up.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, it was snail mail, but I knew that rejection was common. And the website, there was a website I would go to. I didn't have Writers Marketplace, but there's a website called Predators and Editors that would tell you which agents were crooked and which ones were legit and kind of what their sales records were. But my agent, who I'm still with today, 21 years later, was after my 75th rejection. And it took about a year.
Oh, wow.
So I just kept mailing out letters like in batches of like 5 at a time and wait to get them back. And some I didn't get back for a year, a rejection. And I got close a couple times, but that first book I got representation, but my first 3 with her didn't sell. So I got used to rejection. So you gave up on that book, and then what?
It was after that I went to graduate school. Or, that I was in Europe for about 3 years. And then when I came back, I went to graduate school. And I wrote something like a fiction thesis that never went anywhere. It was more like short stories. And I don't think I probably tried to get the individual stories published. Oh, maybe I did get a couple published in nowhere important. And then, let's see. The next few years are kind of a blur. Somehow in 2008 is when my friend Joy Hatch and I got the idea to write this book about raising babies like in an eco-friendly way. And we're like, we could write a book about this. And it was the same energy that I had early on. We were like, this is going to be major. No one has a book out on this topic. We've got to write this.
And this is nonfiction, obviously. This is
it's not fiction. It was more like about cloth diapers and used baby clothes and making your baby food and stuff like that. We got really into it, and we figured out, or we read books and we figured out how to write a nonfiction book proposal, wrote the whole proposal, and then we went looking for agents. And that experience was way different. Than my first experience. Well, of course, I gave up really early on.
Yeah.
But we got a lot of bites right away. I guess we did a good job crafting our query. Within 24 hours, agents writing back, oh my gosh.
Wow.
This sounds right up my alley. Please send me sample pages, but then we would get rejected after that. And it would be kind of confusing to us. We're like, they seemed really excited. What went wrong?
Yeah, well, that's always a spear through the heart a little bit, right? It's like, they're basically, and I've had that same experience with query letters. They basically say your idea is great, but your writing is not great. when you give them samples, then you're like, oh, but that's the problem. Is I've written 400 pages.
Yeah,
but that eventually got published. Was that self-published or published by a traditional publishing house?
Yeah, it was traditionally published. We found an agent and then she sold it. Well, actually, it was a longer process than that. At first, she said we needed a platform, because we weren't experts in our field, or just two random people with this idea. And she said nonfiction you need to sell it because you're kind of known in the field. And so she wanted to start a blog. So this is, 2007 or 8, I forget when it was. And so we started a blog that we called the Green Baby Guide, and we got really into that. And then several months later, that's when she signed us on. She's like, okay, you've established, that took a lot of work.
Yeah,
setting up this whole blog and getting a following and all this stuff. And that's when she signed us on. And then at some point, sold the book. It was published by Stuart Taborian Chang. They're like a imprint of an Abrams imprint.
Got it. And then that's probably your experience realizing that there's no money in writing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a good experience to have, right? Because you're starting to learn the actual business side of publishing, which is tough. But then you went on to write your first novel. or you published your first novel, Broken Homes and Gardens. What was that experience?
Well, I think it was around when the Eco-nomical Baby guy got published. I was like, I want to write this novel. And it was the same experience I had early on where I'm like, this is going to be great. I'm going to write this book. And I felt pretty inspired and wrote this book that I considered sort of like a Nick Hornby style book, like High Fidelity or something. But it was marketed more like contemporary romance, although I wasn't thinking of it being in the romance genre. I mean, I guess it was though, because it was kind of like a bit of a love story. And I did find a different agent, because I sent it to the agent that we had for the Eco-nomical Baby guide. And she said she didn't, I forget what she said, but she basically said she didn't
she
like
might
it.
not rep fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up finding a new agent. And she did eventually sell it. It was to a small press. And that got published in 2015.
Okay. And then here we, flash forward to 2023, and you've kind of, you've gone kind of to the edgier, darker side with No One Knows Us Here. What was the inspiration for that story?
Yeah, every book I write seems to be like a completely different topic.
Well, maybe you're finding your voice. I mean,
Yeah. So how I got the idea for that was many years ago. I mean, maybe even 9 years ago. I was writing for Bustle, the online magazine, and I wrote this kind of tongue-in-cheek listicle called "These Books Would Have Been Better with a Female Protagonist."
Oh.
And one of them was Crime and Punishment. And I started thinking, or then it was in the article, and then I just started thinking of it like, well, what would it have been like if Raskolnikov had been a woman? And I was really drawn to the idea, like, I love Crime and Punishment. I read it first when I was in the Czech Republic, and I was all alone. I had like very high attention span, so I could just read almost anything.
Yeah.
And I remember reading Crime and Punishment in just like days, like I would just sit there and I was really absorbed in the story. He's like a young man who's 23 who, just like me at the time.
Right.
And, but he's a student and he's not eating very well. So he's not really thinking very straight either. And he starts getting in an intellectual conversation with another student about like, couldn't murder be justified if you murdered like a bad person? Because if you murder a bad person, you're actually making the world a better place.
Right. It's the original Dexter.
He gets it into his head that like, this would be a good thing to do. And it might even be like wrong not to do it.
Right. The moral
and
thing
so
to do.
I started thinking of like, well, what would a woman, if that were a woman, like, and she had those same thoughts, how would those thoughts have evolved? Or how would she have gotten to that point where she would start thinking that? And that's where I came up with the idea for this story. And it kind of, that's how it all started. And
so you write the book, and now are you with the same agent at this point?
Yeah, at that point, Jennifer Chen Tran was my agent for Broken Homes and Gardens, and she was still my agent. And I'd actually sent her, it was like you said, like where she had tried to sell a couple other projects I'd done, and they hadn't sold. But I was still with Jen, and I was like, I think this one might be the one. And she really liked it too. And it was, again, a different genre, because this time it's domestic suspense. And actually, that was my problem before, is a lot of my other things weren't in any sort of genre. That's what makes them hard to sell. And I didn't maybe realize that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to think about genre when you're actually writing, because it's such a fluid thing. Like,
you don't necessarily want to be thinking about genre, but it kind of helps if you are in a solid, if the agent knows how to sell it, like.
Right. Because that's what the editor is going to say, is like, how do I position this? And,
Right.
they're trying to look for, because I write thrillers, but, some people will look at it as mystery. I'm like, I don't write mysteries. I'm not, there's not a crime that necessarily needs to be solved. And that doesn't interest me. But when people see it as a mystery, they're like, well, you didn't tie up any loose ends. I'm like, it's because that doesn't interest me. So
Yeah.
they have to position it more as a thriller. But when you're writing this book, you're not necessarily thinking about genre, I guess, but I guess the end product is much more of a marketable piece of work, it sounds like.
Yeah. And maybe part of that is that it did have a plot, unlike the earlier things I was writing.
Plot is helpful. It's not the only thing, but it's helpful.
Yeah, because I didn't maybe believe in plot early on. Like if you're trying to write literary fiction, you're often trying to write, like capture those ordinary moments in a really interesting way. And maybe I never quite mastered that the way like great literary writers do.
Right. We can't all be a Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah. So, yeah, so she was able to sell. Oh, well, actually, it was a really drawn out process. She didn't sell No One Knows Us Here right away because she started shopping it around January 2020.
Yeah.
So right after she was like, okay, we're going to start shopping it around, the pandemic started, and I guess the whole publishing industry kind of, well, the whole world,
Right. I mean, the publishing industry, after being, sidelined for a little bit, actually figured stuff out pretty rapidly and kind of flourished because there was such a demand for books, but it totally changed schedules. Like everything that was being printed, that everything got delayed. I had a lot of friends who had April launch dates, and that all got postponed, and it was a real mess. So it was a drawn out process, but eventually it went to Lake Union. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until June of 2021.
Yeah.
And I actually thought maybe my agent had given up on it, or, I didn't even realize she was still shopping it around because so much time had passed.
Right.
I hadn't heard anything really. And I wasn't really asking for constant updates. There's a point where you don't want to know.
Right.
So she was like, I think I have an editor who's interested in your book. I was like, really? What? And then we met with her. Melissa Valentine is her name, and had a Zoom meeting. This is still during the pandemic, so everything is, well, I'm sure this is how everything is done now anyway. So for Zoom, you don't actually fly to New York to meet an agent the way you do in a movie.
Right.
We had a meeting, and and then it all happened after that.
Yeah, and for listeners out there, Lake Union is an imprint of Amazon, and I'm always fascinated to see my different friends with different publishers and just kind of the impact. And then people who like yourself, for example, with Lake Union, this book was released in January. It's got like almost 5,000 reviews, which is insane. But that's the power of that imprint, right? Because there's a lot of early reads where they're giving it away for free, and you just get a lot of eyes on it. And that's got to be very exciting and a very different experience than Broken Homes and Gardens, I assume. What was that like?
Oh, it's really different. I mean, when you get published by a small press, it's like they care about your book and they love your book, which is why they publish it, but they really don't have that sort of marketing power behind them. It's like a lot more of, establishing relationships with bookstores and going to conventions and little things like that. But I feel like when Broken Homes and Gardens was published, nothing really happened.
Yeah.
Or like I had to do a lot of footwork. Like I felt like I was mailing it out and trying to send emails and trying to see if anyone would, want to carry it in their store. And, but when I talked with Melissa at Lake Union, when we were in our initial meeting, she said, I think we were a little like, we were wondering, well, what does it mean to get published by an Amazon imprint? And Melissa was saying, Amazon is the biggest bookseller in the world. biggest publisher in the world. It's like having your book on the table at the biggest bookstore in the world. And I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's true. And your analysis of marketing from the small press, that applies to a lot of big presses too, right? There's you know, traditional publishers who, will do more marketing than a small press, but only have so much budget, and, as we all have heard, 90% of that goes to the big name authors. And so, usually I hire my own PR firm with every launch to work with my publisher's PR firm. But then you have an Amazon imprint, and like you said, they're not only the publisher, they're the distributor. Like, it's there on the front page, and that's a very low cost proposition to be able to do that, because it's all digital. In order to, at least the marketing of it is just people go to Amazon, they see your book on the homepage, and that's inevitably going to generate, a tremendous number of sales. So that's very exciting. And then then you sold it. You had it done in 2020, early 2020. You sold it mid 2021. It comes out early 2023. How are you spending your pandemic? Are you writing the next novel, or did you sell a multiple book deal to Lake Union?
I had started a new book, but I actually got really distracted from writing because in 2019, Oregon College of Art and Craft, where I worked, went out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I lost my job. But I decided I didn't want to go back to teaching because I'd done it a long time. And I thought I wanted to study graphic design and start this whole new career. And so I ended up studying graphic design in this time. And that's exactly the time between, like, basically my novel is getting shopped around. And then by the time it came out, that's kind of what I did. Like, I learned how to be a graphic designer, and then I even tried to work as a graphic designer a bit, though I didn't really like it too much. I don't know. So I'm still trying to figure out my day job situation.
Yeah. And it's, in mid 2021, it sounds like you had kind of given up on this novel a little bit. And maybe that means not necessarily giving up on writing, but like moving to graphic design or doing something else entirely. And then you get this pretty heady shot in the arm with this sale. Does that make you want to throw yourself back into it? Or are you still, like, as you said, kind of trying to find your day job situation?
Yeah, it did make me want to get back into it. And I was kind of working on this book, like I said, but it was pitched to my editor again. She just did not like it at all. The idea I had to get published, or like, once you're already an author at Lake Union, you can get accepted on proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have to have a book finished in order to write a fiction book proposal, which is really different for novelists. Most novelists know that you finish a whole book before trying to get see if it can be published. But in this case, it was a proposal. So I had a synopsis, a blurb, and maybe a couple chapters.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, "This is not going to be your next book."
Oh boy. You're like, but I wrote a whole synopsis, which is a lot of work, because you have to actually know what the hell the book is about, which is not
right. You have to think of the entire, you have to basically outline the whole book. And I was like, oh no. And I had another book idea that I kind of wrote a semi-proposal for that she liked better. But by the time she said she didn't like the one book, I was like, oh, I don't really like that other idea she liked better. And she's like, maybe you want to come back with a whole new idea if you're not interested in doing either of these ideas. Well, if one idea I'm not interested in, the other one you're not interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of working on developing another fiction proposal, which is a really interesting process. It seems, if you're what's it called? A pantser, someone who doesn't outline.
That's me.
Yeah. Then it's like seems backwards to come up with your synopsis and not basically write the whole thing first.
Yeah, it's really hard to do because and that's the situation sometimes I'm in, is like my publisher will say, I want to know what you're working on next. I'm like, I know the first, third of the book, and I have no idea where it goes or what it's about.
Yeah.
And because it inevitably, if I try to outline, it inevitably changes as I write, because more interesting things typically occur to me on the fly rather than, on a premeditated basis. So yeah, I've sold books on a general idea and a few chapters, but not the full, but that's because I've got 8 books done. They know, it'll probably be okay. I'm just not winging it too much, but yeah. So you're just kind of in this limbo right now. It sounds like, where you're just kind of waiting for the lightning to strike and that killer idea come to you.
Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think it's actually a good thing to be able to get a book deal based on a proposal. Like, I think if that happened to me, I would feel pretty motivated,
Yeah.
And then I think that just because I wrote something in a synopsis, if I did change my mind about something, or as I was writing, things kind of shifted direction, I hope that would be okay. I mean, I don't think they would make sure that you're bound to that synopsis.
Yeah. And I've gone through that too, where it's changed pretty mightily. And then it's just a matter of, it still has to be a book that they ultimately like. I think it's rare that if you're contractually obligated and you give them something, it's rare that they say, according to my agent, this doesn't work for us. It's a matter of okay, how, this isn't what we expected, but how can we work together and make this into a vision that we both agree on? And, that's sometimes that's a year-long proposition. And I just kind of went through that myself. So it's, it was a lot of rewriting, but at least they didn't reject it altogether. But in the meantime, you can bask in the glow of what you have out now. And are you doing any in-person events, things like that, or is all just kind of online?
So far it's been online. I dropped the ball about planning in-person things, with my book coming out January 1st. And so I was there's so much stuff that happened. I had to deal with the holidays, and I was wasn't really thinking about well, when am I going to celebrate this book launch? And I kind of didn't in person.
Right. Yeah. And it's again, it's a different proposition with an Amazon imprint, because you're not going to a bookstore, an indie bookstore, and doing your book launch there, because they don't want that. So you're doing some kind of, you're creating your own in-person event at whatever venue it is, and having copies there or whatever. But it's, it's different, I assume, when you're doing it with Amazon. Big cocktail party, but you should celebrate it. You still have time.
I did worry about that. Or when I first met with my publicist, it was a whole team of publicists. That's another difference.
Totally.
Compared to, Broken Homes and Gardens. But we were talking about events. This is many months ago, before the launch, where I first met with them. And I said, well, would I be able to have some sort of event at a bookstore? I thought bookstores, especially in Portland, I thought they were kind of boycotting Amazon products. And they're oh no, we had some authors and they were listing different bookstores in town that were really receptive to local authors having events there. I was oh, maybe it wasn't as big of an obstacle as I had imagined.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's great. I didn't know that at all. Well, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do that same exercise you did when you were a little kid with the prompt. We're going to do a quick little storytelling. I've got 3 books here. I'm going to have you choose one of them, and we're going to pick a random page and a sentence from that page. And I'm going to read that sentence. And then that's the first sentence of a very short flash fiction story that we're going to craft together. So I'll read that sentence, and then you give me maybe the next one or two sentences, and then I'll give you a couple, and then after a couple minutes, I'll call it a day. But the 3 books to choose from, and this is just a real variety. A Painted House by John Grisham, which is actually like his only, I haven't read all of John Grisham, but it's like his only non-legal book, and it's a beautiful story, actually. This is brand new. Jamie Mullert, Kings of a Dead World. I'm not actually sure what it's about. It just came to me in the mail. And similarly, this is just an ARC. It hasn't been released. Ciera Horton McElroy's Atomic Family. Again, not really. I think I'm interviewing her at some point, and I'm not sure what the book is about, but they're all novels. So choose one of those 3.
Well, let's do the last one, and then
Okay.
then you'll get a little taste of her book.
Exactly. So give me a page number between 1 and 250.
57.
Okay. And then I'm going to just look at this page and see if I can find a sentence that might. All right. We'll make this easy. It's just a little piece of dialogue. You don't know anything about me, she said.
I know enough.
I know you weren't where you said you were supposed to be last night. And I know by the time you got back to your house, it wasn't that late, but you didn't bother to call me.
There's a lot more going on than you may realize.
She looked at him, wondering how much she should actually reveal. She could feel her face flush and how she hated it when she knew that she was blushing and she didn't want to. She stuck her hands in her coat pockets and felt her keys, wishing she could just drive away.
Okay, I'm going to just tell you everything. For the last 5 years, I've been on a secret mission. I actually work for the CIA.
I've had enough of this, he said. You're constantly lying to me, and you're trying to inflate your ego. Why do you think I'm just going to believe all of these things? I think maybe this should be it for us.
This can't be it. You are a key part of my mission.
Okay, if this is the truth, show me or tell me one thing that can prove that you're with the CIA.
Go into your room, and there's a crawl space in your closet. Open the crawl space, look into it, and you'll find a box. Inside that box will be all the proof that you need.
Oh, I think we call it there. That was good. I'm wondering if there's actually a box in the crawl space, or if the second that he turns, she stabs him.
Yeah, I got a little confused about which character was which at some point.
I know, but that's just don't you get that when you write as well?
Yeah.
Like, who's this again? what? How old are they? Yeah, I get my characters confused all the time. Well, Rebecca, it was lovely to talk to you, and congratulations on all the success with No One Knows Us Here. That's very exciting.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, enjoy it all, and hopefully our paths will cross, maybe at one of these mystery conferences. So until then, congratulations and thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Take care. Bye. Okay, folks, that's it. That was my conversation with Rebecca Kelley. Told you it was going to be a good one. And if you want to find out more about her, or certainly check out her new book, No One Knows Us Here, just hop on over to her website at RebeccaKelleyWrites.com. And while you're at it, please visit my website, CarterWilson.com. There you can buy my books, check my appearance calendar, and subscribe to my awesome newsletter. Highly appreciate that. So more episodes of Making It Up will be out very soon. Keep tuned for that. In the meantime, I appreciate, as always, you listening or watching this show. Take care.